Yeah, okay, so this is the history of Or Sameach. So the background to the history of Or Sameach is, and this is why I asked you the question. This is something that I have no idea whether or not you guys are familiar with the history of European Jewry and an American or English Jewry, but in the late 19th century, right, there was a huge influx of Jews from Eastern Europe to Western countries, to the U.S., Canada, and to England. Most of this was from the Pale of Jewish settlement, which was this is in Eastern Europe, places like Poland, Lithuania, Russia, not so much Hungary, Romania. Anyway, so those people who came to those countries, right, they left their homelands, the Shtetlach in Eastern Europe, right, and settled in the West. So most of them left their Yiddishkeit in Eastern Europe, right? You probably are familiar with this. It's a very, very common phenomenon, right? I have no idea. How many of you are Bali Tshuva? How many of you come from religious homes? Okay, so before 1945, like let's say in the States, and even in England it's partly true, most of the Jews, England, the States and Canada, most of the Jews were not religious, and the right, Fromkeit, Yiddishkeit, right, Yadut, was something that was disappearing. Right? Classical Judaism, right, from Halachic Judaism was disappearing from these countries, basically from the whole world. And it looked like it was going to disappear. There were very, 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 in America, for example, there were almost no day schools, a few scattered ones in New York, maybe one or two in Chicago. LA might have had one. I'm talking about the late 40s, early 50s. There was basically nothing. And basically, if you were to ask anyone who was, somebody who was interested in demographics, or somebody who was studying, the social religious history of Jews, they would say that Orthodoxy was dead, right? So, and it pretty much was dead. I know from personal experience, people who've told me that almost everyone in yeshiva in the 40s, 50s, right, even early 60s, they became not religious after they left yeshiva. Almost everyone. There are a few exceptions, but very, very few people stayed religious because that was the way the world was going. There were, especially after the Second World War, there were some refugees that came to the West, right? And we're not talking about France, which was totally assimilated until after 1948, when there was a huge influx of North African Jews into France, right? But every place in the West, basically, there was no halachic Judaism left. But there were some refugees that came into these countries from Hungary, mostly the survivors of the camps that came, from Israel. They had emigrated to Israel after the war, the Second World War, and then had left Israel because times were hard here, and they went to other countries. They went to the States, to Canada, to South America. Anyway, these communities, they had either Hasidim, or you had Litvish, kind of Rosh Yeshivas and Talmidim, very few, just a handful of people, but they dedicated themselves to rebuilding Yiddishkeit in lands that were totally inhospitable to Frumkeit. It's very interesting. So the idea of bringing back people, Bali Tshuva, people who had no Jewish education, bringing them back to halachic Judaism was, a very quixotic dream, right? Almost nobody believed that if you asked for people at the time, they would have said it's impossible. They said it's never going to happen, right? Nobody's going to. Why would people take on this stuff? Like they have to keep Shabbos and keep kosher. There was no kashrus. There wasn't. It was like everything nowadays, especially in the States and Canada and even in England. Right, kashrus is ubiquitous. You can find kosher food at any place. You can go to Iowa, you could go to Oklahoma and find kosher food in the supermarket. Well, you couldn't do that even in New York in the 40s and 50s. There was no OU symbols on anything or anything like that, right? So people would think, well, you're crazy. Nobody's going to be able to rebuild it. But anyway, some people tried, and they were somewhat successful. They set up day schools. Torah Messiah was able to set up day schools in different cities, and they managed to actually, educate people who were from religious homes who wanted to send their kids to religious schools. But of course, there was very little keeping them within the fold, right? Very little incentive for kids in those days, for teenagers, for kids, whatever it is, to stay in halachic Judaism, but because of the day school movement, they were able to keep those kids. And then in the late 50s, early 60s, the idea arose that you could actually try to bring people who were not from families, but who were from assimilated families, back to Yiddishkeit, back to halachic Judaism. That was a tremendous chiddush. No, people also thought that could never be done. Why would anybody be interested in doing this? Why would they be interested in becoming frum? But there were some people who thought that, it's worth it, we should do this. One of those people was Rabbi Schiller, right? And there were a number of people. As a matter of fact, I had a chavrusa when I'm from Cleveland, and I had a chavrusa in Cleveland, a guy named Mordechai Blumenfeld, whose brother is Yisrael Blumenfeld. And these two brothers, one was at Harvard, one was at Columbia. They came to Israel on a Young Judea program, a year program. It was that's a conservative movement. They came to Israel, and they were here, doing whatever they were doing. Nothing religious at all. Yeah, but they were having a year in Israel. This is in the early 60s. They happened to meet a person named Noach Weinberg. Noach Weinberg Zatzal, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Torah. They met him, and he had a chavrusa whose name was Reb Nata Schiller. Right? They were chavrusas. And they learned with these two brothers. And these two brothers, they just like a kid. They invited them for Shabbos, and they invited them to come and learn with them. And they did. They came and learned with them, and they were amazed. These were two very, very bright kids in college, and they were just totally turned on. And after that year, I don't know how many months it was that they learned with them, but after that year, they went back to the States, probably finished college, but then went to Ner Yisrael. They sent them to Ner Yisrael because that's where they were affiliated. Rabbi Schiller was affiliated with Ner Yisrael. He had gone there after he had learned in Chaim Berlin in New York. And Noach Weinberg, his brother was a Rosh Yeshiva in Ner Yisrael in Baltimore. So they sent them there. And these guys became so turned on. One of them became a Rosh Yeshiva, and the other was tremendous, brilliant balabas, a rabbi. He was a Rebbe in day school. Anyway, they were basically the first Baalei Tshuva of that generation, of that post-war baby boomer generation. The first ones who were, I'm sure there were others, but these were the first two guys who, they had an approach of learning with people to make them frum. And so when they saw that this was an idea that might have some success, they were successful with these guys, maybe they could be successful with other guys. So they decided, it was Rabbi Schiller and Rabbi Weinberg, decided to try to start a yeshiva, start a program. Of course, it was a long-term thing. This was in the early 60s. Eventually, by the time they raised the money Rabbi Schiller mostly raised the money to start a yeshiva, it was already like in the late 60s. And they started the yeshiva. They had a number of Rosh Yeshivas, who eventually Rosh Yeshivas. One was Karl Rosenberg, who started Machon Shlomo. If you heard of Machon Shlomo and Machon Yaakov, those are his institutions. And there was Noach Weinberg, who was Yeshivat Ohr, and Rev Mendel Weinbach, who was our Rosh Yeshiva also. So those four started a yeshiva called Shema Yisrael, which was here. It's like here in the neighborhood. And it was in the Vardak, if you know where it's Shmuel HaNavi. It was Shmuel HaNavi neighborhood. So they started a program, and they attracted tremendous people. I mean, guys, you couldn't believe how intelligent, how brilliant these people were. These were guys who were at Harvard and at Yale and at Columbia. They were like really smart, really smart guys, good students. But there was a time, this is the late 60s, early 70s, when people were searching for spirituality. Right? It was a time of the Vietnam War, and people were rebelling. Young people were rebelling against society, against their parents, against against everything in the Western culture. They were looking for something else. They were looking for spirituality, and this was a place. Their institution was a place that attracted a number of people. You also had, for people like Mayor Schuster, who was Zetzal, who also was trying to recruit people, visitors coming to Israel. He would try to get them to come to hear some classes in yeshiva. So this was the beginning of Or Sameach. And eventually, for various reasons, they decided to split up, and that's how Yeshivat Ohr and Machon Shlomo were formed. It was basically a split up, but Rabbi Schiller and Rabbi Weinbach, they started Or Sameach. So Or Sameach started, one of the people, a number of people, are still on the staff, believe it or not. Or Sameach is a place that has attracted very talented people, as you probably know from listening to the rabbis here. It also has a tremendously loyal staff. I mean, the rabbis here have either learned here, almost all of them have either learned here, or they've been teaching here forever. So, one of the first students of the yeshiva was Rabbi Proman, who you probably don't know because he hasn't been here in the last year and a half and he needs a refuah shlema. But Rabbi Proman, who was here for over 40 years, Rabbi Pindris, who many of you have seen, he taught in the Beis Medrash until last year, and he's still here on Shabbos. He was here. He was one of the original people here in the yeshiva. He was a teacher. He was a very young man at the time, and we have a lot of other people who Rabbi Myers. I don't know if you know these people, but we have a number of people who have been here since the earliest days, Or Sameach grew. We started off in the Vardak, as I said. Then the yeshiva moved to Tidhar, which is where the Mechina program, or part of the Mechina program, was housed. You know, Tidhar over here across the street. Huh?
Mini building.
It's a building. Yeah. It's the Mealy building, exactly. Yeah. And then in 1977, I think 77, 78, the yeshiva moved here to this present location. What can I tell you? I mean, we've had Or Sameach is a tremendous success, as you probably know, by attracting the top people the top people in Jewish thought, in Jewish philosophy, in teaching Gemara, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very, and attracting the top students like you guys. So anyway, okay, I'll answer any questions that you might have. That's a very short history, but there'll be a book coming out probably within the year about the history of Or Sameach, which is being written by Rabbi Pinchas Kaznet, who was one of the original students at the yeshiva. Yeah.
What surprises you from when you first started here till today about Or Sameach?
Good question. So I started here. I came as to learn here in 1986. So I've been here for a long time, longer than most of you have been alive. The thing that surprises me most is, I would say, the enthusiasm and of the Talmidim. That it's constant. The constancy of the enthusiasm of the Talmidim here is. I suppose it's not really proper to say it surprises me, but it's the thing that I like best about the yeshiva. You know, that the guys here, unlike perhaps other places, everybody's on fire. Pretty much everybody's on fire. Everybody is really interested in learning what there is to learn and really doing what they should be doing. But the interest of the students is the thing that really, I just love that. It's amazing. Yeah.
Could we get a bit more history on the programming? How new programming came, some programs left.
So the yeshiva has, right, that's a good question. Over the years, Or Sameach has hosted, let's say, different programs in different languages. So we had we used to have a French program where we had Rebbeim who were French, who were Frenchmen, French speakers and Frenchmen. It's another yeshiva. Now it's called the Yeshivas Rashi, which is still around. We had Spanish. We started a Spanish program here, which now has split up into a number of different yeshivas here in Yerushalayim. Spanish for Spanish speakers, Portuguese speakers. And we've had a very large Russian program. We used to have, where Derech is now, we used to have, let's say, 50, 60 Russians here. And there's a Rabbi Eliyahu Esas, who was the head of it. He was a brilliant, absolutely brilliant rabbi. He himself was a refusnik. In Russia, he was a math professor who got fired because he applied to come to Israel. And absolutely brilliant guy. A guy who came from nothing and learned, he became a giant Talmud Chacham. And he was the head of the program, and there are other Russian rabbis there. That program also left the yeshiva and became its own programs with other, associated with other institutions. We used to have the Israelis. When I first came here, there was an Israeli Or Sameach, which still exists. It's in Ezra's Torah, which was a very excellent program. As a matter of fact, when I started in the Israeli program, even though I'm not Israeli, and I hardly spoke any Hebrew, but I wanted to learn Hebrew, so I started learning in that program. That was where Derech is now. But since then they left, they went on their own. Yeah.
So what I was trying to understand is, where did the need for a variety of different levels? Because I know it started off as two programs, like the main one, and then there was like a beginner's one, but now it's branched.
No, it didn't. It didn't start out that way.
Now it's branched into center.
Right. Yes. Right. So no, when it started, there was only one level. There was no such thing as different levels, this or that. You just were thrown in. You started off. You were thrown in to the yeshiva. That was it. It wasn't any catering to people who didn't, they didn't want to spend so much time learning or this or that. They wanted less Gemara. No, we didn't have that. It was one program. you were thrown into the sea of Talmud. That was it. You started learning. You get Gemara. It was Gemara and Gemara and Gemara. And there was also Rabbi Bullman, who was Tanakh. He would give some classes on Tanakh. Rabbi Perlman would give classes in Chumash, but basically it was Gemara. That was it. They were full. Rabbi Gottlieb came later, and he started giving lectures in philosophy, and gradually, because of as the yeshiva grew, so it was difficult to necessarily have, let's say instead of like 2 shirim, we started off. I think the yeshiva started off with 2 or 3 different shirim, different levels, right? It was one place, but it had 2 or 3 different levels. But after a while, as the yeshiva grew, we needed to separate the programs because people were at different. We had quite a number of people at different levels, so we had to accommodate them. So it made sense to split it up, and also, to accommodate those people who didn't necessarily want intensive Gemara study. So that's why we split it up. So that we have, I don't know if you know the differences in the programs, but right now we have the Mechina, which you guys are in, right? Which requires you to commit to 2 Sidurim a day, right? You don't have to have a night Seder if you don't want it. Center, you must go to the night Seder, so it's 3 Sidurim a day, right? And you're in the center?
Yeah, there are a few of us here.
Some of you are in the center, good. And the Beis Medrash, right? The Beis Medrash is the Beis Medrash. So that's how it evolved, right? That's how it evolved. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Was there any controversy with naming the Yeshivat Ohr Somayach?
None.
None? Okay, I thought I had read somewhere that someone claimed that it shouldn't be just a yeshiva, it should be that name belonged to everyone, or maybe it was controversy around the name Shema Yisrael.
I'm not aware of it. I don't know.
I read it on the Or Sameach wiki page.
I never heard that. I have no idea. As far as why we're called the Or Sameach, right? So right, because Meir Simcha of the Vinsk had no children, right? And both Rav Weinbach and Rav Schiller were very big fans. They really, they were very big fans of the Or Sameach, and so they decided to name it for them, so that you guys, right, you're the Talmidim are his children. So that was, So there was no controversy within the people who were running the place. I don't know, maybe somebody else had some taina on them or something. I don't know, but not aware of it. Yeah.
Was there a story with the Chafetz Chaim and the Or Sameach that the Chafetz Chaim said something that hurt the Or Sameach?
I don't know. I've never heard of that. Don't know. Anything else? Other questions? Good. Okay.
That's good.
Okay.
What
Yeah.
the general want of Or Sameach? What does the Or Sameach want from all its Talmudim?
Okay. What is Or Sameach want from all its Talmidim? So I'll tell you. What Rabbi Schiller says is, we want the most Jews to do the most mitzvahs. That's our goal. Whether they do all the mitzvahs that they should do or not, whatever it is, but after you've come here, we hope that, first of all, that you'll marry someone who's Jewish, right? That's certainly a big goal of ours. You marry someone who's Jewish, and you'll do many more mitzvahs than you would have done if you hadn't been here. That's our minimal goal. Obviously, whatever you can do to get a taste of the Torah, to get a love of Torah, to make Torah part of your life. Obviously, that's something that we hope for very much. And those people who want to commit themselves to a life of learning, great. And those people who want to, most people, of course, are not going to be able to do that. They'll have to work, but they'll always have, right? They'll always have a seder of learning. That's what we want. If, as Rabbi Schiller says, if you were stranded on a desert island and the only thing that you were able to save with you on the desert island is a Gemara, you'll have what to do with it. You'll be able to enjoy it. You have great time learning that Gemara. That's what we want.